We are the denominational Presbyterian Church USA. PCUSA has about 8,800 congregations in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. And right now, the most important of those is you, First Church, Oxnard. 12 years ago, we began an advisory service that we call Project Regeneration. You know Maggie Harmon, and you know her capabilities and her skills and her passion for the church.
Thank you, Paul.
Whereas Maggie works on strategic things, I tend to work on tactical things. Project Regeneration has worked with just at 1,200 congregations from coast to coast in 46 states. We're still waiting on North Dakota, we're waiting for Hawaii, and I forget what the other two are. About a third of the churches, maybe 25% of the churches we've worked with, have entertained the possibility of selling some or all of their campus. And we have worked with about 140 that have completed that process. So my role here this afternoon is not to tell you what to do. That's your decision, obviously. But to give you a little bit of context of what we have seen with other churches, including churches your size, as to the selling process. You've retained capable counsel. We work with CBRE nationally and have for about 7 years and enjoy a wonderful relationship. But church polity comes into play. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you can probably expect, some of the potholes that you probably want to avoid, and talk about what we've seen in different places, and we offer our assistance to you. I'm a ruling elder from Greenville, South Carolina. I've been with the foundation for 19 years on staff and was a volunteer for 5 years before that when I was in finance and the healthcare industry. I have 2 children, and one of them is a senior at Presbyterian College. Radford College actually beat out Presbyterian College in the quarterfinals in tennis, where my daughter's boyfriend plays. I'm just not going to tell her that part. I'm going to tell her about the scissor lifts, but not about the Radford connection. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Maggie Harmon, I think that you all know me. I had the pleasure of being with you not too long ago. I'm your ministry relations officer. I also work with the Presbyterian Foundation. As Paul said, I do the consultative piece. So I'm here to work with you on stewardship, on legacy, on the visioning part that we talk about in Project Regeneration as we think about who we can become, who we can be. And we've got that on the calendar for March to do some visioning work together that I'm looking forward to.
Thanks.
I'm Paul Farry. I'm a CBRE. I've been doing this in this market for about 35 years. I can't say I'm a specialist in church property, and I don't think anybody is. Usually industrial, and we also do some residential land. And there's a call from the city of Camarillo. What do you know?
If they have an offer, feel free to step in.
Yeah, that's right. We'll talk to that in a minute.
So, my name's Larry Tonchi. I grew up in Camarillo. I've been doing this for roughly the same time, about 34 years. And I'm a retail broker, and we run across churches quite a bit, but we also do a lot of work with switching over shopping centers to residential quite often. So we run into that quite a bit. My family's been in the farm, ag land business for some time, so I get pulled in that direction too lots of times. That also entails housing.
Dexter Wilkerson, been with CBRE for a little over a year now. I work directly with both Paul and John.
AJ Bernhardt, CBRE. I work on Larry's team, focusing on retail transactions for the last 3 years.
John Cardona, CBRE as well. I work with Paul and Dexter, mostly focused on industrial, but our team over the last year or so has actually gone and done some school locations, school sales, as well as some previous churches. So we do understand how to transact in that regard, and then obviously our relationships with the city of Oxnard, we do a lot of day-to-day discussions with them on both residential conversion and industrial. So we're happy to be here.
I'm Ron Vincent, a member of First Presbyterian Church, on session, the treasurer, do everything guy around here, it seems like.
Yep.
So I'm pretty involved with the
Traffic's awful.
infrastructure of the church itself, as well as finances of the church.
My name is Paul Miranda. I'm an elder and involved more in the music of our church, but also the clerk of the session in the next year.
Lynn Green, I'm an elder.
I'm Bev Fredheim, and I'm an elder, and I'm the personnel and administration elder for First Pres.
And I'm Sue Mayer. I'm an elder, and sorry to be late. That traffic out there was terrible today.
We heard.
I came from Camarillo.
Sue also serves as our parish nurse,
Oh, yeah.
and she's our outgoing clerk of session, training Paul. So we're recording this, so anyone who wants to take minutes would be great to have some sort of record. So I'll let you guys flip a coin on that one.
Well, and before we jump in, I'll apologize in advance because I'm going to leave at 5 o'clock so I can get back to the Santa Barbara Airport.
Sure.
So if I run out, it's not because I don't like what someone's saying.
So since that's happening, I'm wondering if we could get an update from our brokers on latest lay of the land, anything changed since we've last talked. I remember getting an email from you guys about wanting to get the property on the market in the first quarter of the year. So I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more about that as well.
Well, John touched on our relationship with the city of Oxnard. It's a little bit more complicated than he touched on, and that is that CBRE, a person who brought both Larry and I, and subsequently the rest of our team, into the brokerage commitment and contract with the city of Oxnard. So CBRE is a big company. Hutch has a master contract with the city, so we get to talk to them, and he sort of uses us for our different expertise, but he has got a relationship with the city of Oxnard that's contractual. They have an interest in this property. Ron was in a meeting with Ashley Golden, and we talked to Ashley about their interest in the process. Then we subsequently had a meeting with the planning director, Kathleen Mallory, and she confirmed there's an interest in the property. And then about a week ago, she sent an email to us, said, hey, we haven't connected, but just FYI, we're still rolling inside the city. The city has a grant or a pot of money that they can spend on affordable housing. And it kind of fits into this property kind of well right now. So we can talk a little bit about a two-tiered marketing strategy. We want the competition of the general market, but the city brings so much to the table in a processing standpoint. Mm-hmm. I mean, the entitlement, Paul, you probably know this already, Megan, you know this already. The entitlement process in California is laborious, period. It's not like any other, maybe New York and Illinois are like this. There's no place like it. There's all sorts of requirements that people have to jump through to get a project entitled, but not if you're the city. The city also promotes 2 or 3 of the usual suspect developers that also do, not strictly affordable, but they have an affordable component. There has to be an affordable component in every project, and that's how you get a density bonus as well. So we're in a pretty good position if we talk to the city right now and push them into the point where they have to sort of act. We say we're going to market, and they've got from what they've said, they'll jump immediately into the mix.
It's on their radar. The email that we got from Kathleen right before Christmas was basically saying, we're discussing the zoning and the general plan for this, for the actual project. So it's completely on their radar that they're trying to figure out internally if it makes sense for them, and then also just to help after our last meeting. So that's very positive news in terms of their time frames, as we discussed. It's 6, 8, 12 months on some of those entitlement processes, longer.
Can I ask a quick question here? And this is, I think, for Paul, but I want to make sure that this is information that for the session largely. How would that fit with the polity of having to go through Presbyterian, the process of the approvals that we have to go through as part of PCUSA.
Right, that's part of what we'll hit. It takes 3 votes to sell a property.
No, sir.
They have to be in a particular sequence, and one of the things we'll talk about in a few moments is a communication strategy to make sure that the 3 votes go the way we want them to go. Our experience is if a congregation fails to approve a property offer, it's usually a good 5 years before you can go back and get that same set of 3 votes because of the psychology of,
And you thought
we
the
tried
city
that
was bad.
before.
So what are the 3 votes?
We'll come to that.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to interrupt these gentlemen.
I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you were asking about timing, that's important. So as far as timing goes, the Presbyterian Council has appointed a task force of 3 people to work with us. And the 3 people are our executive presbyter, Jason McKelly, and then our stated clerk, her name is Sandy Toitz. She's also an attorney. And then a pastor named Jennifer Fraser from St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Santa Barbara. So those, Sandy and Jennifer are from the same church.
Do they have administrative commission authority, do you know?
No, the presbyter hasn't given them any authority.
Okay.
Like, there's some debate on this in polity. This is whole going down to the weeds, but that we've never talked about any group in our presbytery having administrative commission authority. I think our presbytery are required to be explicit. I don't, according to policy wonks I don't think it can be implicit, but some people think so. So it's really a weird it's a little murky here. But I remember one thing Paul, you saying to me, and I don't know how this fits in the whole strategy of dealing with presbytery, is that while the presbytery would need to approve the sale, there is likely, we don't have a rule on this, there's likely no approval needed to put it on the market. And I don't know the best way to approach that. We're having the task force is meeting with us on February 7th. And so I wonder, in your view, Maggie, dealing with groups like this, do you think they'd approve us going on the market at this part of the process? Or do you think that's a long way off?
Well, so that means you would be doing 4 votes. Our general rule of thumb is keep the number of, the book of order requirement is 3. We don't usually recommend, we recommend getting informal consensus on marketing the property.
Okay.
On listing the property. But if you go through a vote to list and then a vote to sell, then you double the chances of the potential for a negative vote. And we see that as a bad thing. I'm not saying that happens a lot, but our rule of thumb is don't ask for permission until you have to have formal permission. And we'll get to that part.
Yeah, that would be good to know,
sequence.
because that'll inform us on how to deal with the task force coming up. Thank you.
But everyone in the presbytery, everyone that you just named, are people who want the best for our churches, who want ministry to continue, who want us to be thriving. Paul is right, and moving with expediency is the right thing to do. And I think that the more honest, open, transparent you can be, having sat in a lot of presbytery meetings where votes are going on, the more people will feel the positive energy that's going on here to move forward with this. So I think engaging your partners there is not going to be a bad thing.
It'll be essential.
Yeah, and we actually invited them to this meeting, and they said they would not be coming to the meeting. I don't know, Bev, your interpretation, but they see their role as pretty narrow, don't they, this
they're
task force?
not advisory at all. They made it very clear. Yeah,
Really?
So if I could ask one question, are we contemplating an outright sale? We're not talking about retained equity or any type of partnership on any activity going forward. We're talking about sell the property, we go our way, city can do what it wants to, right?
Yeah, I think.
Or any buyer.
I think Pastor Ted went through a process with a well-known architect to potentially develop only a portion of the property and leave the church structure, and that doesn't seem to be the path that everyone wants to go. So no, I don't think it's an outright sale, right?
Okay,
Mhm.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, fine.
okay. Well, I think maybe we'll turn it over to Paul and Maggie to give us the lay of the land from the Presbyterian.
Maggie's got the earlier flight, why don't we let her go first?
Yeah, there you go.
You know what, you're gonna hear from me in March, so I don't really have anything to contribute right now. We are gonna be doing some visioning work so that we can think about how this ministry continues to live.
Yeah.
And how we take and honor the resources and the tools that this campus has been in the ministry that continues. But we're gonna do that work in March. Paul is really, he has the expertise on how PCUSA works around property sales and how to navigate that. And that's why I really wanted him to be here to walk with me through that process.
So thank you, and what you've both said so far, I knew from Maggie's side about Project Regeneration. I wasn't aware that your side of it's a part of that, but that's interesting. So are we kind of getting the whole Project Regeneration thing? Are we
She's the new and improved.
Okay, all right.
So when we started this,
Yeah.
it was going to be financial analysis and real estate transactions. And then in 2020, we added and I sort of like the tactical versus strategic, the discernment assistance, the thinking through who you are, what you want to be, what is God calling you to be in this place at this time. So yes, this is all part of the Project Regeneration Advisory component. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of congregations that will work with Maggie and will reinvent in place, and I'll never get a phone call.
Yeah.
There are other properties, like one on it was either Monday or Tuesday. Decision had already been made. They want to unload some excess property. It doesn't really have anything to do with their vision. It is an investable asset.
Yeah.
And so the discernment piece wouldn't happen there, but the transactional piece does. Mm-hmm. So I do transactions. She does the hard work of thinking and praying and imagining and helping you think through how all this fits together.
What about the legal side of it? So
everything she does is completely legal.
I know that, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's where you're going to work with Presbyterian. There are resources that they can help you with that exist at the Office of General Assembly. And just to round out, Paul's experience and what he's bringing to this, I think that most of you know this, but I came to the foundation 4.5 years ago after spending 10 years in management consulting. And so a lot of the work that we're going to do in March is really built on my experience of taking for-profit companies through this kind of decision-making at an inflection point, right? Understanding where we've been, knowing that that's not where we're going to be, and then trying to figure out how it is we get to where it is we want to go with a series of workshop exercises to help us move through that understanding and definition and goal setting. So that's really where this is coming from. And the work that we're going to do is it's very intentional, and it's not easy, but it's also designed to help build consensus so that there is a strong unity around where it is this congregation is going, physically, psychologically, and emotionally.
And so while Maggie can see 1,000 shades of gray, I'm a former chief financial officer. I see black, I see white.
Yeah.
And my role is, this is going to be a real shocker from a finance guy, help you maximize the selling price, minimize the risk, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, so that you can go forward with the things that you and Maggie have come up with. So mine is very, very transactional, very procedurally based, where hers is strategic and some would even say therapeutic.
I am an interfaith chaplain, so there's that part.
There you go.
There you go.
And there was nothing in the MBA curriculum that had anything to do with interfaith chaplaincy.
Yeah.
So that's where we sort of approach this. So let's talk a little bit about what does it look like to sell real estate in the PCUSA? Okay, 8,800 churches. About 1,500 of them are going to probably close in the next 5 to 7 years. It's simple math. So the average Presbyterian church, the median, the bell-shaped curve, right at the top, that's a congregation with 63 people and about 35 in worship.
That's us.
That is what we
That's
call an
us.
absence of critical mass.
Yeah.
Because those people can very rarely afford pastoral leadership,
Right.
a building, and programming like parish nursing. It's almost a mathematical impossibility unless there is fee-for-service income, like on a preschool, or occupancy-related income, like renting space to other typically tax-exempt organizations. Some churches rent to taxables, but then you get into some unrelated business income tax issues. Or perhaps there is a large endowment or a large level of reserves. So as we think about First Oxnard, you've already been taking some of the very, very wise steps to maximize your income through giving, through occupancy-related purposes. And once a sale goes through, you will have an income-producing asset that you'll probably refer to as the building fund or the investment pool or what have you. And the number one caution is exercise prudent financial discipline on that pool of money, because the saddest cases we work with are the churches that sold their property 10 years ago, and today there's no money left.
Yeah.
I worked with a church in Tennessee that wanted to tithe the property proceeds. The trouble was they were really, really bad with math. And they ended up giving away not just the entirety of the property sale proceeds, but they gave away more than the proceeds.
That's really bad math.
It's terrible math.
We're better than
Don't
that.
move the church to the Bahamas.
Right. And that church ended up closing 8 months after the property sale.
Oh my gosh.
And it was painful and it was tragic.
Yeah. And they had nothing.
They had less than nothing.
Yeah.
And the Presbyterian wasn't too happy because the Presbyterian ended up having to pay the insurance premiums until the property sold. So on the subject of painful, let's acknowledge something just right off the bat. This isn't easy.
We already know that.
This,
Yeah.
that's one of those duh statements.
Yeah.
Captain Obvious here.
Yeah.
This is a place that people have known and cherished for what, 60 years?
50-something, yeah.
This building.
Yeah.
This building,
And there was a previous building.
right. So this building has hosted baptisms and funerals, weddings and memorial services. And when you walk through those enormously tall doors, you enter into a sacred place that you will remember for lots of different reasons. And it's hard to let go. And that's natural and that's to be expected. But the future, while yet unknown, the future is filled with promise. And so as we talk about some of the nuts and bolts of how churches have sold real estate, part of it is to address the very natural grieving. The United Methodists have a beautiful liturgy for decommissioning a sacred space. We have those resources. We are happy to share them with you. So that on that day, whenever that day is, when you leave the building, there is the symbolism. It usually involves the physical movement of the sacred texts, of the baptismal font. And those objects, those relics of our faith, are moved from one place to another, even if that other place is temporary. And so we move those symbols of our faith, and the same space that had been set aside for holy use is now returned to routine use. And I have participated in those services, and they are quite moving, and they are quite meaningful. The United Methodists, for example, when they sell a property, they have a rule that all the religious insignia, now I don't know how they would do it with your elevated,
Giant cross.
yeah.
And the
I don't
tower
know how
out
they would do
back.
that easily. Probably get somebody with a forklift.
Yeah, that's right.
Their rules are that all the religious indicia is removed before the property is listed.
Before it's listed.
Before it's listed.
Wow.
So that they are not selling a sacred space. They are selling a secular space.
That's interesting.
The LDS church and other traditions will have a practice that the baptismal font is filled with cement. And so there are these different expressions of how we live out our faith and how we move from, oh, this is my church, to a realization that the church is the community, that you are my church. This is just the building that we happen to enjoy. This is where precious memories have been created. But don't you remember when we were little? This is the church.
Yeah, there's
Open the door, and where are the people? And there are the people. Well,
Yeah.
the people, the kindergartners have it right. It's the fellowship of believers. And so, for example, you won't hear me talking about selling the church. Church of Jesus Christ is not for sale and is eternal. The campus, on the other hand, this is bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
And this can be purchased and this can be sold. And the way we communicate that to our parishioners, to the members, the way we communicate that to the neighborhood, the way that we communicate to potential buyers and to presbyteries is really, really important.
Yeah.
And as we move down that path, we are happy to help you figure out a communications plan for the congregation, for the presbytery, for potential buyers, but also for the neighborhood. The neighborhood is the one that a lot of churches leave out. And I've been involved with a good half dozen situations in which the neighbors killed the deal.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I live in Greenville, South Carolina. Here's Charlotte. Here's Atlanta. We're halfway in between. We refer to ourselves as the buckle of the Bible Belt. We are home to Bob Jones University, a fundamentalist institution of international renown. We are a churchy place.
Yeah.
Metro population is about 1.3 million people. You can worship not in 6 different Presbyterian churches in Greenville. You can worship in 6 different Presbyterian denominations in Greenville.
Uh-huh.
And in the last 2 years, 2 proposed church property sales got killed off by the neighbors.
Oh my gosh.
They either didn't like what was going to go in. So friends, we don't want to get in the middle of what this is going to be.
Yeah.
We want to sell our property, and we're going to go do our thing, and the new buyer can do their thing. Or, and this is the great irony, in some situations, and we've seen this in Ohio, we've seen it in Virginia, we've seen it in New York, and we've seen it in Greenville, the center of the universe. We have seen people who have no relationship with the church, none whatsoever. In some cases, protest in front of the offices of the buying organization saying you're trying to kill religion.
Oh gosh.
I don't think you'll have a problem in California.
No, I
I'm
don't think
pretty
so.
sure that's not going to be the issue in California. But we have had, we were involved with a Southern California sale about 5 or maybe 6 years ago. where the neighbors really, really, really didn't want multifamily housing.
Yeah, that's my fear.
And they exerted pressure on the session of don't sell to that group.
Yep.
Okay. Communication strategy. Really important. So let's talk about, and I always do this, and maybe it's a little bit negative, but I'm going to give you 4 don'ts. Here are 4 things you don't want to do. Number 1, don't waste your time. This is the session. We'll talk it for a minute, what that means. Number 2, don't waste their time and don't waste potential buyers' time.
Yeah.
And part of that is don't try to test the criteria of every potential buyer. Don't try to test whether their business plan holds water. That's not our business. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your buyer's time. Don't try to be a psychic. Don't try to figure out what the best use for the property is and what the best buyer is. These guys are going to do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay? So don't try to figure out what kind of church would want to buy this place or what kind of developer would have the best business plan. That's the buyer's job. Don't check your emotions at the door, but don't fall in love with a potential buyer. Potential buyers for churches will frequently want to meet with the session over and over and over again.
Nice.
And they're going to want you to fall in love with what they're going to do. And then they're going to ask you for concessions on price. We see it over and over. We have even seen churches, Peoria, Illinois,
Good old Peoria.
they fell so in love, they gave the property away. 6 months later, it was back on the market and sold like that.
Oh, my.
Newark, New Jersey, a brand new charity that nobody had ever heard of, purchased a property at 40 cents on the dollar because the session fell in love with the vision. I met the guy. He was pretty good, I'll grant you. He flipped the property less than a year later,
Sure.
pocketing $2 million in net profits. Don't fall in love. Don't forget to have a good, healthy sense of skepticism. Now, if you're going to sell to the city can probably afford to pay cash. Cities tend to have money. If you are considering selling to a tax-exempt organization, vet that organization thoroughly and completely and ruthlessly. Because the number one reason that property sales fail to go through for church properties, and this is national, this is United Methodist and us and the disciples and everybody else, is the buyer's inability to get funding. Probably the case with taxable buyers too. We hit one in Illinois back in September. The buyer's wife wouldn't let him buy it. He wanted to buy it as an investment property. And he called back a few weeks later to say, well, my wife won't let me. Like, okay, that's a new one.
Paul, can I say something real quick here?
Please.
I want to add an element of sacred and profane, right? Because we're talking about money, and money conversations are hard, right? And it starts to feel like, where do we stop being the church and just start being transactional? And what I want to remind everyone here is that money is a resource, and it's a tool. While this isn't about money, we also want to think about, maximizing that. And I think that that's the resource about the information Paul's providing, is we do want to think about that and be smart about that, because at the end of all of this, that becomes a tool for further ministry, right? So that's the reason that we want to talk about, get really deep into, are we selling to the highest bidder? I mean, obviously, if you get a buyer who wants to come in and, build a sweatshop, which you wouldn't be able to do in California anyway, maybe you look askance at that. But in general, The end of this is about maximizing the resources that are available for ministry. And that's why we go through this process of having a conversation about, you know, the profane piece of money is so we can get to the sacred use of the tool.
And that's a perfect segue,
Sure.
because what you are sitting in right now is a tool for mission. It is a tool for ministry. Oh, you know, it's got brick, it's got mortar, it's got sheetrock. What we're talking about is a conversion, not the Paul on the road to Damascus kind of conversion. What we're talking about, as Maggie said, we're talking about converting a brick and mortar asset into a fungible asset. Initially cash. Ultimately, down the road, perhaps another building, or perhaps lease payments. So while this sounds really, really, really secular, all we're talking about doing is converting one asset into a different asset. And just as you have been careful with this campus, we would encourage you to be careful with the money equation. So what do most churches experience? Most churches experience that it's difficult to make the decision. You've probably already experienced that. Most churches that are successful in completing a transaction have discovered that they can't relitigate it. They can't relitigate that decision over and over and over. Make the decision, make a good decision, and then move forward. I worked with a church in Florida. It was right on a big commercial strip, and the realtors encouraged them to put up a for sale sign. Big old for sale sign. That sign went up and down 4 times in 2 months because the church session kept arguing about whether or not they had made the right decision. That business about don't waste your own time, that's what we're talking about. The average religious property in the United States takes about 18 months to sell. It's not going to take y'all 18 months, right?
Nope.
Our record is 10 years and 1 month. Our record on the other end is 24 hours. That's what you're shooting for. 24 hours. Most property sales, from the time you first start talking to the time that you finally vacate the premises, it's usually a couple of years. Now, you folks are well down that path. So some of the handouts I give you, you can go straight to the last page because you've already done so much of the homework. Good for you. When we talk about not wasting other folks' time, it is no secret that churches, particularly denominational churches, are usually known to be pretty bad sellers because we make decisions in groups.
Yeah.
You know, we don't let Ted have the checkbook.
Good thing.
We have lots of different opinions. And then to make it worse, we rotate officers every year.
Yeah.
So acknowledge the fact that we're not an ideal seller, but also acknowledge the fact that the folks who are interested in buying your property are going to have their own set of motivations. Completely honorable, reasonable motivations. Most will not understand why it takes 3 votes to sell a property.
3 votes.
3 votes. So let's talk about the 3 votes, and you have to go in the right sequence. Number 1, the session votes to sell the property and to call a congregational meeting to approve that action. Number 2, the congregation votes to sell the property. Number 3, the presbytery votes to concur with the congregation's action. Now here's the bad news. There is no national model for how presbyteries do this. Give it about 9 months. The foundation's going to be publishing some best practices with the input of a lot of presbyteries. That's part of our strategic plan. In most presbyteries. The presbytery gathered votes. That's going to be the highest risk factor in terms of voting, because people you have never met, people who have never shown up at a presbytery meeting before, are going to be casting a vote as to whether or not you folks should sell your church for such and such a price. Where we've seen things go a little bit awry is when somebody's sitting out there. It's always a guy. It is never a woman. It is always a guy who says, you know, I think that property could sell for more.
Oh, yeah.
My personal favorite, Cheyenne, Wyoming. A guy gets up, you know, that property was given by the Smith family.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And my next door neighbor's wife's first cousin's brother-in-law's hairdresser was, and I'm not far off on this, she was a member of that family. Well, thankfully, the presbytery staff and the presbytery leaders were supportive of this sale. And so they got the two of us from the foundation to stand up and talk about the trail of ownership. There were no Smiths involved. And the fact that apparently everybody else in the room knew that guy was a nut too. The sale went through. But these things can happen.
Yeah.
So you make sure your presbytery leaders are on board. You also, relatively early in the process, you find out what the presbytery requires. Do they require?
Can I ask one
Yes.
question real quick?
Yeah.
Because it sounds to me like they've already done 75% of the first vote they're about to do with the congregational meeting. So we're already almost one vote
Oh,
through.
yeah. I mean, y'all are way down the
Okay.
road.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have a congregational meeting Sunday, but it's like sort of, we're not going to vote.
It's more of an
More-
informational.
Session's just going to present.
How many times have you done it?
This is the
gonna be
first time, yeah.
Okay, do it once.
Yep,
Don't do it 26 times.
right,
One time.
yep.
And then you have a congregational meeting whenever the appropriate time is, and you vote.
Okay.
Keep your congregational town halls to a minimum.
Yeah.
You got to do it once, but the more often you do it, the more you send the message that, well, here's an idea,
Yeah.
as opposed to the session is behind this 100%. And so you make sure that your presbytery folks are informed and enthusiastic. You also ask about what requirements, because every presbytery can have different requirements. Do you have to have a broker's opinion of value? You guys did a pretty nice one. It would have been more helpful if y'all had sat in the same order. We were doing pretty good until we got to you. So you got a broker's opinion of value. Do you need a title abstract?
Got that.
Most presbyteries require that. Some presbyteries even require, an environmental assessment. I can't imagine that would be the case here.
It's California.
Well, that's true. This has never been a
You know
mortuary,
what? None
right?
of the other presbyteries where I've seen property sales in California have required an environmental review. I mean, that's
That's up to the buyer.
that's the problem for the buyer for
That's
whatever
a
they want
buyer's
to do,
issue.
but you guys shouldn't have to do that for presbyteries,
No.
certainly.
In Pennsylvania, you see it a lot.
I wouldn't be
I've
surprised.
never seen it. I've never seen it in California. I don't even think I've seen it west of the Mississippi. In Pennsylvania, seen it a couple times in New Jersey, seen it in West Virginia a lot.
Maybe a coal
I
mine
mean,
underneath.
we sold a church manse that had been a funeral home previously. There was probably bad stuff in the dirt. There probably was. Those chemicals are tough. So you find out what the presbytery requires. You also find out outgoing clerk, incoming clerk, right?
Right.
You make sure that your registration with the state of California specifies who the officers are. So just because she's, quote, retiring as the clerk of session, you want to make sure that both from a civil perspective and from a polity perspective, the right people are available to execute the transaction. And in our system, it is typically the treasurer and the clerk of session who sign on the church's behalf. Now, do you folks have different corporate officers? Or do you?
No.
Yeah.
Well,
We'll vote on that in the congregational meeting.
Yeah. We, I can't remember, I think it's the session that votes, and we report the officers to the congregation. I think that's how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
No, yeah.
We have a
So we
president,
typically, it's going to be the
secretary,
clerk and
treasurer.
the treasurer
okay.
are the secretary and treasurer.
That's the cleanest way to do it, okay? All right. A couple of other things about the presbytery. Be prepared for a discussion about the stewardship of the resources. The presbytery is going to want to make sure that you don't squander the resources. You know, it would be pretty unusual for you to deconstruct this building brick by brick. But the trouble with an investment portfolio is you can draw it down dollar by dollar. Most presbyteries seem to be reassured if the foundation is at the table. We seem to be a trusted partner.
And we are in the Presbyterian of Santa Barbara as well, so they are comfortable working with the foundation, and I think that we'll be confident in your investment choice to help think about how you build a portfolio that gives you the resources you need without spending down. So I don't think that will be a concern.
I saw.
Let's not go to the Bahamas.
Well, I saw, one thing troubled me, and I talked with you about this, Paul, about the policy of one presbytery, which actually the national capital, which was developed because of one congregation, and they had a custodial arrangement.
Right.
But that's not typical. Typically, is it with the foundation? And
They have one of the 5 most oppressive policies in the country.
Because the Presbyterian Council has to vote each time the church wants to draw down some.
Well, no. Actually, the policy makes it look like that.
Yeah.
What they do in national capital, this is Washington, D.C. And these are churches, we got dragged into this because the church, the congregation, and the presbytery were at loggerheads. What they did was they set up a spending formula.
Okay.
So say it's 5%. So say your net proceeds are $5 million. If you do a 5% spending formula, that's $250,000 a year, right? National Capital, what they meant to say in their policy, and their policy was not well written, what they meant to say was, yeah, there's the 5% draw, and anything over and above that, presbytery would have to give consent. And if you read the policy, that doesn't really sound like what the policy says, but that's what they do in practice. And we work with the presbytery and that particular congregation. We do steward their assets. So I wouldn't worry about that. Santa Barbara is usually considered to be a pretty friendly presbytery. And it doesn't have near the crazy factor that a lot of presbyteries have. What you might hear and what you might want to think about in advance is they might ask for either quarterly or an annual basis an accounting of, do you still have your assets, or did you go to the Bahamas and spend half of them? I can argue that either way. You know, the presbytery has to give permission for selling this building. They have to concur with the congregation's decision. It's not that much of a stretch for them to say, well, gosh, if we've got this, quote, interest in the building, in some respects it makes sense that they would have interest to ensure that you're continuing to be good stewards, just as you have been, on the investment portfolio. They may or may not ask for that. But you should be prepared for whichever side that goes to.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking a little bit about not going too slowly. That's what these guys are going to worry about. They're going to worry about y'all aren't going to move quickly enough. Okay? And that's a reasonable concern because Presbyterians move slowly. We don't want you to move too slowly. We also don't want you to act hastily. Don't, and we've seen this probably 30 times where something comes up out of the blue. Usually there's not realtor representation when this has happened. because these folks are going to be objective. And if they see a scam or a nut, they're going to insulate you. But don't go flying off the handle, jumping on an opportunity from somebody that you've never heard of, a concept you've never thought of, and it just seems too good to be true. Because guess what?
It is.
It will be. Right. So you've got capable advisors here. Listen to your advisors. Let's look at a couple case studies real quick. A church in an urban area on the East Coast was preparing to sell its property. They went to an enormous amount of effort to tidy up the place, to make it look nice. They were even talking about painting it. I talked them out of that part.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, really? I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie.
Safe travels.
See you in March.
Safe March.
Thank
Drive
you.
carefully.
Reach me if you need anything.
Yes.
Be safe.
Listen to Waze on the way up.
So I talked about a painting, but they went to so much trouble. And you know how the story's going to turn out. They thought they were going to sell to another
Not the building
congregation that wanted the pipe organ, that wanted the cross, that wanted da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, of course, that offer fell through. And they ended up selling to a developer. And you know what? The bulldozer didn't really care how clean the building was.
Yeah.
So you are not selling your home.
Yeah.
You're selling your organizational home.
Mm-hmm.
You are not going to bring in a staging expert.
Yeah.
You're not going to make sure the curtains match.
No.
My hunch is, gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, my hunch is the value here is the ground underneath.
Yep.
And there's a simple way to think about this. Who created those walls? Man.
Yeah.
Who created the dirt?
Yeah.
God. The value is not in what we have done. The value is in what the Creator provided.
Yeah.
That's what somebody is going to be paying for. Okay? That said, don't trash the place.
Just in case.
I've gone through some churches, it's like, do they not have trash pickup in this? Stuff everywhere. So in that case study, that eastern urban area, the church went through all this exercise of, and frankly, I mean, I worked with them for 2 years. When they sold the church, it looked fabulous. But haven't you heard the story? You never wash your car right before you sell it, because then, or get it detailed, because then you look at, wow,
Looks
man,
pretty.
this is a nice. Do I even want to sell this car? Another case study is a church in another east of the Mississippi, major urban area, one of the biggest cities in the United States. They sold their property and they wanted to put 1,000 conditions on it. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. They were pretty sure it was going to be a worshiping community. Well, it had to be the right kind of worshiping community. And you can't do this and you can't do this. Well, every time you say what a buyer cannot do, you reduce the pool of buyers and you reduce the likely selling price. So in that particular church, they spent a full year thinking about all the people they would not sell to. Well, we don't want a liquor store to go in here. Most liquor stores don't take 8 acres, okay? Well, we don't want a strip club. Well, we don't want on and on and on. They ended up selling to a Christian school. But it was a Christian school that observes a different orthodoxy than we do. But what we were able to finally get the church to agree to was when they moved somewhere else, their ministry on that corner was complete. Their legacy might remain, but their ministry was complete. And if someone else wanted to develop a different kind of ministry on that corner. That was well within reason. So don't try to control what the future is.
Oh, yeah.
Don't try to predict what the future is, because we're usually wrong. You always, and these guys are going to be the ones that are going to do this for you. Always disclose to potential buyers what the process is. The average approval process in most presbyteries, start to finish, is about 90 to 120 days.
Oh.
Okay?
What is that again?
The average approval process from the time the session votes to the time the presbytery votes to concur is usually 90 to 120 days.
That's for all three votes?
That's for all three votes. These guys need to know that because they're going to need to disclose that to a buyer, because some buyers, that 24-hour sale,
Yeah.
we had a contract within 24 hours. We closed 9 days later. We had to pull some rabbits out of the hat to get the presbytery. It was a contiguous property owner. It was an asking price. He was paying cash. And you know what the session did. You know what the session. We were on a video conference.
Uh-huh.
You know what? Tell me what the session did.
Take
Yep.
it.
Yes, yes.
Oh, no.
That's worth more.
That's what we do.
Well, good gosh, if we can get asking price in 24 hours, if we wait a couple, see, you've met those people.
It was a guy, yeah.
It was that guy. And I wanted to reach through that Zoom call and snatch him bald-headed. I was like, okay, you got everything you asked for, and now you're saying it's not enough. Well,
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thankfully, his sister was also on the session. That's not usually a good idea, but apparently in Wyoming that happens a lot. And she told him to hush, and he did. So yeah, they've got to disclose that there is this process. There is a certain level of risk, okay, for the buyer. At the same time, there is a certain level of risk for the seller. Have y'all talked about earnest money?
No, we haven't. But yeah, when you talk about that, well, I can add into that too.
Yeah. You're going to want significant earnest money. If it's the city, I wouldn't worry about the city. If it is a large, reputable enterprise, that's one thing. If it's a buyer you've never heard of, make sure. So here's a statistic. 75% of all purchase contracts for religious properties fall through. Wow. Don't fall in love, because 3 times out of 4, that's not going to end up being the buyer. Now, for the kind of property you have, you're not going to see those kinds of odds. The fact that you've hired people that have experience, I mean, we think the world of CBRE. They're going to protect you as well. But don't fall in love, because it might not work. And I will tell you that is very, very disheartening for the congregation.
Oh, yeah.
Which means when you have a contract, you don't share all that information with the congregation on the first day, because you don't want them getting all excited. Oh, the city's going to buy our property for $22 million. When it comes time for the vote, yeah, you've got to disclose. But in a lot of ways, you want to insulate the congregation from the potential of things falling through, because they'll get discouraged, and they're less likely to show up for the congregational meeting if it's the 5th go-round. And you've been telling them all, oh, this buyer was great.
Yeah.
And they pulled out. So you've got to keep the congregation appropriately informed, but not in the weeds.
Paul, I have a question for you for that.
Yes, sir.
So say we end up getting 2 or 3 offers, all generally the same price. When does the congregation find out about that, or does local make the decision on who that end buyer that they want to choose is?
So the congregation wouldn't be told that the congregation could be told there were 3 offers. I would not recommend that. The way our system works is the session has the responsibility to make a recommendation to the congregation to sell the property. So they would not recommend 3 possibilities. They would recommend one of the 3.
Got it, okay.
So,
Yes,
if I
ma'am.
could ask, so are you saying that we don't bring it to this congregation for a vote until we get an offer?
Yes. That, yeah.
Well,
We vote
what
to
are you going to
sell.
vote on?
Vote to sell, and then.
We're- So the first of those, the second of those 3 things was for the congregation. So that's,
Right, so the
a
congregation is
concept thing.
going to vote conceptually
that's.
to sell
okay,
the property.
Okay,
And then the congregation, check with your presbytery, what we prefer is that the congregation votes to sell the property and delegates the authority of negotiating the contract to the treasurer, the treasurer, the clerk of session, and the pastor.
Exactly.
Now, some presbyteries won't let you do that. We prefer that.
Well, the fewer people in the mix, the better.
Right.
Better it is.
Right.
So those 3 people will vet the offers?
Yep.
And then the process that you were talking about, this 90 to 120 days, will be once there's an agreed on, and let's just try not to be too technical here, a letter of intent of agreement that's what is presented to the presbytery, right? You don't have a
Well-
contract because you don't have a final agreement. But I'm envisioning this as being a general agreement in terms that's been negotiated, then it gets kicked upstairs for,
So typically, by the time it goes to the presbytery, there is a contract.
oh, there is.
The LOI has been accepted by the clerk of session, the treasurer, and the pastor
Okay.
on behalf of the congregation, if the congregation has granted that authority. Now, that does vary from presbytery to presbytery, so you're going to want to check on that.
Yeah.
Some presbyteries require the congregation to vote on the specifics.
I don't think
So
so.
I'm wondering out loud whether the specifics of a contract will be negotiated prior to that submittal. There are some buyers that would say, I'm not gonna spend my attorney's time and effort to negotiate that contract, and we'll have to have someone on our side. And between the 5 of us, we're past masters,
Yeah.
we're kind of amateur attorneys here, so we save a lot of people money
Yeah.
generally before it's finally given the blessing.
So presbyteries don't negotiate. Presbyteries, it's thumbs up, thumbs down.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
either a hard yes or a hard no, based on the contract terms.
Got it. I've got a lot of confidence that this team can get us to a place where the buyer has an understanding of the process.
Right.
And Larry just flashed me a quick note. And what we can do is give the buyer a head start on their due diligence of the property, while we say, we don't have experience because this is a first deal, but this is a process that we have to go through, and we're gonna recommend to them that they're doing their due diligence as if they're under contract.
Right.
And I think that we'll be able to be successful with pretty much anyone who comes along that's sophisticated enough to understand that. If they want the property, I think, and that'll help us, because it's gonna take a year to 18 months to entitle this property for what the city allegedly says can work here.
If it's not the city.
If it's not the city.
Right.
Right.
Um,
So that's a long time. Can we get people to close before full entitlement? Possibly.
I remember that when you presented to us, there were these 2 prices, and the lower price was close quickly, the higher price was wait.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's the way it's gonna be approached.
And what we recommend, and obviously with the city it's different, we don't recommend that churches get, for example, in zoning issues, we never recommend that the church begin the zoning change
Yeah,
process.
Absolutely.
Simply
agree.
because the buyer's gonna end up being different.
Absolutely
Yeah.
agree.
Yep.
makes sense.
And so to go to your point about beginning the due diligence, the session would have the authority to instruct you that due diligence can begin. You don't have to have a congregational vote for exploration.
Right.
You have to have the congregational vote to sell.
Yeah.
And again, you want to check with your presbytery. Smaller presbyteries like Santa Barbara tend to be a little bit more fluid and not as rigid. And that when the process is done well, and I can tell already that y'all have done it well, fluid is helpful.
Good.
We're not completely counting out the possibility that someone would come in and buy the property as it sits now, as a building, as a functioning church. that's a possibility. In our analysis, we just think there's far more likely there's going to be a redevelopment into multifamily.
Well, the price point, when you look at the price point, you look at the neighborhood demographics, the type of church that would be, and I mean, the number one buyer that we have worked with have been other churches closely followed by real estate developers. We've done maybe a dozen sales to municipalities. The demographic in this neighborhood and the type of church that would locate here based on location does not tend to be cash rich.
Right.
And
Yeah.
remember, the way denominational churches buy property and non-denominational churches buy property is very, very, very different. Okay? It would be very, very surprising to me if you sold to a denominational ministry. If you did, it would probably be AOG or Kogic or one of a denomination outside the main line, if that makes sense. Okay? I've got a couple handouts. Questions, thoughts, concerns, rebuttals. I got a 21-year-old. I'm told I'm wrong every day of the week. It was not
I think this was absolutely fascinating how well you thought through this and some of the way you presented it.
Well, thank you.
I don't know if anybody else feels
I wish you could be at our meeting
Can
on
you
Sunday.
come Sunday?
I'm afraid I'm tied up Sunday.
So that's a
Yeah.
little too, I mean, but certainly the foundation is going to be available to us and to come to a congregational meeting if we'd like them to, and if that's recommended, Maggie should be here, or you, or to come to Presbytery. And I guess that relationship with the Presbytery is something I didn't quite understand, but Maggie says we have a good relationship.
We do.
Thank
Okay,
goodness.
good,
Yeah.
good.
So there are 160 some odd presbyteries in the United States.
Yeah.
The variety in how they handle finances and real property surprises most people. The other thing that surprises most people that will terrify these guys is, as a denomination, we don't know how much real estate we own. There's no list.
We don't what?
We don't know how much real estate we own as a denomination.
Oh,
There is no
interesting.
list.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a
That's
wow.
kind of scary.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's other two words, and one of them starts with O. Because we went from, we've always been a connectional church. And, before I forget, if your buyers are kind of antsy about this approval process, ask them if they've got a Presbyterian or an Episcopalian on their board. And it is amazing how quickly, because we'll get phone calls sometimes from banks saying, hey, blah, 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 blah. I was like, let me speak to the Episcopalian there. They're going to understand. Because this is the way denominations do it. Our denomination is different. We're not fully independent the way the Baptists are. But we don't have the same kind of rigid hierarchy that the Episcopalians and the Anglicans have.
Yeah.
We have this really messy in-between. Seems to work. But what it means is, if you were in a different presbytery, the rules would be different. If you were in D.C., the rules would be downright oppressive. If you're in Texas, they do whatever they want to and just tell the presbytery afterwards. I was in Texas last week. This is the way they operate. I'm going to pass out a few things. Thoughts, questions, concerns? What
How often does this happen while we're in the process of beginning?
Okay, I could interpret that two ways, so I'm going to answer both ways. I have conversations multiple times per week with congregations that are exploring selling properties. Okay? This is basically all I do, it feels like. Well, that and cemeteries now. I do a lot of stuff with cemeteries. We ain't going to talk about y'all's.
We had the conversation already. Yeah, so we're in
You
good.
spend a little bit of money, but y'all are in good shape.
We're in pretty good shape with that.
Yeah.
Auto guy sorted out.
So the two possibilities.
Oh, no, let's don't even go there, Ted, because no.
You don't go there?
You got it covered.
All right,
Yeah,
good.
I got confidence.
All right, well, so you and I will talk, but it's really what we talk, it's
If it goes wrong, it's
Ojai
Ted's fault,
and
right?
the Conejo.
Yeah. So no, I spend the bulk of my time talking to churches that are either trying to sell property or trying to lease properties to others. That's one way to interpret the question. The other way to interpret the question is, how many of these conversations end up with a property sale? Between a third and a half.
Wow.
Rare is the property that cannot be sold. Using a highly scientific approach that I have adopted, which is called gut. If I think your property cannot be sold, I will tell you. Have we helped churches give their property to the municipality? Yes. Did we once recommend a controlled burn, a training exercise for the local fire department? Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And I already know how far away that door is and how fast I can run. Were they happy to hear it? No. Did they end up doing it? Yes. Because sometimes the most financially advantageous option is to give something away. If it's a net cost to you,
Yeah.
and you can avoid that cost, clearly that's not the case here. So let's talk about the negatives for a minute. When it doesn't work, why doesn't it work? Number one reason is leadership. The number one reason that churches end up not being able to sell their property is they don't have strong leadership, both clergy and laity. I'm going to be in Ohio in 2 weeks. Now, that property is going to sell. Actually, it's a municipality that's going to buy it. They argued with each other for 2 solid years. I've probably been to 5 of their session meetings. And after the 4th one, the pastor pulled me aside, and it was that guy. I mean, it always is. Well, the guy that was protesting so much, he's not a member here. And yeah. I had one of those today. A lady who doesn't want the church to sell the property, and she is not a member of the church. She is not a regular participant at the church. But because her grandmother was a member of the church.
Oh, yeah.
So here's the other thing. There's something about church property sales that seems to bring out the nuts. Be cautious of the nuts.
We will.
Send the nuts to these guys. That's what you're paying them for. You think you're paying to get the property sold, you just want them to manage the nuts. But no, the absence of strong leadership is the number one reason why church properties don't get sold. The process is not easy. I mean, you folks have done 60% of the heavy lifting already.
Good.
Okay?
Good.
You folks are way ahead of where most churches are the first time I talk with them. The second reason why transactions don't go through the way the session hoped was unrealistic expectations. That broker's opinion of value you've got in there, cherish that document, okay? Because I have worked with churches that thought their property was worth $10 million and it sold for $250,000.
Oh my gosh.
I worked with one in particular. They thought the property was worth $300,000. All right. Now I realize I'm in California. In the Southeast, the second religion is, come on,
Football.
Money.
thank you, college football.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
This property was one block from one of the biggest Southeastern Conference football stadiums in the United States.
Unbelievable.
We ended up selling it for $4.5 million, and they built game day condos. Do y'all know what game day condos
Oh,
are?
yeah.
Oh, God.
You can't live there.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't stay but 4 days at a time. I will never own a game day condo for lots of reasons.
There's such a thing?
Oh, yeah. We sold the property. It was a PCUSA congregation that had a killer good location. They moved out to the suburbs, and they are still counting the money today.
Wow.
It's a great story. It happens to be true, but the moral of the story is one reason why things don't go well is when expectations are not met. So it's going to take longer than you want it to take. It's going to be emotionally painful. You will have a buyer that wants something that you haven't thought of. But you got to be flexible. And you've got to remember, who built these walls? We did. Who created the earth underneath? God did.
Yeah.
The value, as in everything else, the value is in what the Creator made, not what we have done with it.
Remember that, Ron, when you speak to the congregation on Sunday. No, really, that's
what
because
I've
we have
been saying.
a few people that are just locked into the brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a visit from the pastor. Sitting down saying,
Right.
we know you love this building, but it is a new season.
Yep.
We all love this building.
Yeah.
We don't want to give it up. But there is no light at the end of the tunnel
Right.
unless we sell. If we sell, we have money that we can reinvest with and try and make, I wrote it down the other night. I was
Making notes, huh? Yeah.
money from the church sale gives us money to continue to hopefully grow.
Right. It gives you an opportunity because you are sitting on a precious asset, but also a valuable asset.
And she's attended this church almost the
The
long
whole time.
Anyway,
Her whole
29
life.
years.
My great-grandmother was one of the founding members.
Wow.
That's great.
Mhm.
And so, as you think through these things, it is natural to grieve, it is natural to feel the pain, but it is also wise to remember that this is an asset. And you know, Maggie does the stuff that I don't know how to do. She can talk to you about vision and strategy. What I do is I help you execute what you have decided. And remember, my two goals are maximize the selling price, minimize risk. That's what I'm here for. Questions, concerns, then I'm going to hand it over to these guys.
you mentioned something before 2 or 3 of the people came in.
Mhm.
You said that 8,800 churches in our
Mhm.
congregation,
No,
In the church?
country.
In the PCUSA?
PCUSA.
you would say 1,500 will close, you said, in the next year or 2 years?
Next few years.
Probably 5 to 7
Yeah,
years.
just
Because we don't even close churches quickly.
so that was kind of a wake up
It
that
was.
we're not the only ones that
In
are
2 years?
looking.
5 to 7.
Five to
But remember, our process for closing churches is complicated. I'm working with one church that has 4 people in worship, and they have a building about half the size of yours.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah,
Do they have an annuity? I mean, do they have a?
they have money, but they don't have as much money as they think they have. And so the last thing I would offer up is this. These things that are happening in American Protestantism, they've been happening, but COVID accelerated
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
so
we saw that.
much. I've worked with churches that suspended gathered worship for as little as 8 weeks and as many as 129 weeks. The churches that suspended worship for the longer period of time, not surprisingly, are having trouble getting people back, more so than the folks that were just slightly out of commission for 2.5 months. The world has changed around us. And COVID, I think when we look back in 10 years,
Yeah.
we're going to say, gosh, we lived through that and it was really inconvenient. But we didn't realize it was this seismic shift.
Yes,
I can tell you, in American Protestantism, this is a seismic shift.
it is.
And the days of small congregations, and I mean really small congregations, 15 people in worship, those days are numbered. And we've got 2,000 congregations that are probably mathematically unsustainable today. You are not in that group, thanks be to God. All right, we're about out of time. What else?
Yeah, no, we're the average congregation. You said 35 in worship and 63 members, and we got about 99 members, and generally about
86 as of today.
86 members and about 40 in worship.
No.
Yep.
Gentlemen?
Here's a question.
Oh, yes, sir.
I think one of the things that's going to bother a few people, myself is one of them, is the amount of time that's likely we'll have. Suppose you guys find a buyer that we're willing to go with. How much time do we have to pack up and move out?
A lot.
Okay.
Okay,
Because
like
you've got
months.
the process that you have to go through, the approval process, and we're gonna try and convince the buyer to use that to give a head start in due diligence. Your highest and best buyer might want complete entitlement before they close. He may be the person you choose to go with. I'm gonna say that there's 3 or 4 people that work with the city right now, the developers, that know the process, and when the city tells them, we're good, we're gonna allow you to do this, you're gonna get X amount of units, through their initial due diligence, that they'll close before that. But I don't see anything closing for, 6 months.
So 6 months,
From basically when we.
minimum.
fast.
I was gonna say
That's-
minimum.
Yeah, that'd be the fastest, in my mind, unless it's someone that buys the structure. And a school, a church,
Even then.
someone who, yeah, even then it would take a while because of financing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then some people are gonna say, well, I got my bank commitment, my bank commitment's good for 60 days plus 30 maybe, and that's as long as it's gonna take you guys to get final approval, so there'll be some dancing around that, but most likely it's gonna be, it's gonna easily take a year from now, to answer your question. So plenty of time.
If there were some contract where they wanted to close earlier, you can always talk about rights of continuing occupancy. We have worked with some, usually it's another church
That's a
or
good
a school, where, oh gosh, one of them, it was 3 years of continuing occupancy
Wow.
using the sanctuary because the school wasn't open on Sundays. I mean,
Yeah, that's logical,
Yeah.
that's exactly.
Another thing, just a fun fact to know and tell, in our experience, if a school wants to buy your property, you will have a signed contract by the middle of February. If it doesn't happen by the middle of February, it's not going to happen for the coming school year.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great point,
Yeah. Anything else? Ted, what did we leave out?
No, I think we're going to find out about, so we need to take all this information and carry it with us to the time we meet with our Presbytery folks and ask some of these questions that have been raised to our Presbytery team, which we're getting a couple visits from our Presbytery. So they're really interested in us because we're selling our property. So not only are we getting the task force, but they said, oh, let's have your triennial visit this month. Yeah, so we're getting that on the 24th of January.
That's right.
And so it's important to.
Do we have to be here that day?
Yeah, we're going to have an in-person session meeting. It's our normal session day anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
It's our normal
Tuesday.
session day anyway. And instead of having a regular session meeting, we'll just have the triennial visit. And that's going to be me having a meal with the 2 guys, Jason and Keenan, and then them meeting with all of us together, and then them kicking me out, meeting with just you to see how, in your view, I'm doing. So.
That kind of a
Boy,
meeting.
you're brave.
Yep.
We're all being graded.
Yeah, we're all being graded.
It's
Session is
So-
being graded, Ted's being graded, and session with Ted is being graded.
Yeah,
so.
and then and it's just like the health. Make sure we're not, messing up or that we're not presenting ourselves in some way. And then a couple weeks later, on February 7th, that's when the committee is coming here, the task force. That would be Jason, Jen, and Sandy. And at that time, they're going to give us so they might send them to us in advance with what their requirements are. So when we get, Jen actually said she would send them in advance.
Yeah.
So when she sends them, I'll send them over
Yeah.
to your office, and
Yeah.
we can sort of start processing that.
One thing that's always helpful when you're meeting with the Presbyterian committee, a one-pager with a whole lot of white space left, when you say, here's the rationale, here's why we need to move.
Good, good.
You can't say it in 5 sentences, you're saying too much. Okay, 5 sentences max.
Yeah.
Here's why we need to move. And then, here's the process by which we move. We're going to retain CBRE. We've retained the Presbyterian Foundation. You say most presbyteries, when they see that kind of thing, you have just cut their workload by 75%. Because most of the time, the way these first meetings go is, what do we do?
Yeah.
And if you've got a good plan in place, that instills confidence and it speeds up the process.
I have a question. So, the Presbytery as a general meets every 2 months.
Okay?
Their next meeting is in February. I don't know the date.
You're not going to make it for that one.
Right. So then we have until April when
Right,
we can get the vote.
But they can always call a meeting if they need to. That's
Well,
the
but
thing.
again,
Oh.
I would argue that Presbytery approval is not required
No,
to
it
list a
isn't.
property for sale.
Okay.
However, I have zero authority. The foundation, the only authority we have is for the 28,000 funds we manage. So we don't have polity authority. The
Okay.
Presbytery has polity authority. So what you're going to do is you're going to ask, when is that action to be taken? Most presbyteries will say, when you have a contract to sell the property, we will concur with the congregation's decision for that. Most presbyteries don't require permission to list a property. Now, they don't want to be surprised,
Right, right.
but you want to find that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so a matter of process here.
Yes, sir.
What's your thought on the timing of the congregational meeting to, this Sunday is the presentation?
So this Sunday is the first presentation. It's the
Yeah.
town hall. Then we'll only have one more meeting
For the vote.
for the vote.
Which is looking in the crystal ball, when is that?
It sounds like.
We need to look at a month or two, maybe, maybe a
At the latest
month.
April, at the latest.
Yeah, but we have a small enough congregation
Yeah,
that we've talked with a bunch of people already. So a bunch of people in our congregation know about this from us having told them. Others know from, the
Word of
gossip
mouth.
line. So then we'll figure out who doesn't know, who's opposed. We'll talk with the rest of them. Then we'll call a congregational meeting. A session will decide that. So hopefully 6 weeks, maybe. I don't know. I'd love it.
I mean, kind of,
It needs to be after that February 7th meeting, obviously.
Yeah, it will be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And no offense to Ted, get out the book of order. Make sure you remember to follow the steps for calling a congregational meeting.
Book
2
of
weeks
order.
advance notice. and
We
blah,
got
blah,
that
blah.
dialed in.
Yeah.
And then you document all that stuff.
Right, yeah.
Because I have dealt with some buyers who have required evidence that the seller went through all the steps.
Yeah.
It's rare, but I think they have.
But you have to be prepared.
okay, so
We've announced it in our bulletins.
can, in February, just to keep the train on the tracks, and you're saying we can't, so we cannot meet the Presbytery in February. Can the Presbytery
As a
be
whole.
informed of our intention to sell?
You're
So
gonna
that we're inkling to them or whatever.
You're going to inform the Presbytery leaders, but not the Presbytery gathered. You're not going to get up in a Presbytery meeting and say,
Okay.
Right.
we're going to come back to y'all and ask for permission to sell our property in 2 months or in 4 months. You talk
Yeah.
with the Presbytery leaders,
Ted has that dialed in.
because they're going to have the pulse of the Presbytery.
Yeah.
And then the only time, you only want to ask for permission when you have to ask for permission. Don't ask for permission too often.
Yeah.
Too
So,
early.
so if I understand the process right,
Mhm.
session is already voted, yay. We're gonna
Okay.
inform the congregation on Sunday. 4 to 6 weeks from then, we're going to,
Vote.
the session's gonna vote to bring it to a vote at the we're gonna bring it to the congregation for a vote. In the meantime, we're gonna, my term is inkle to the leadership.
Well, we're gonna meet with the leadership.
Okay.
On February
Okay,
7th.
we're gonna inform them that, of our intention, that the session is voted, and then, so, February, March, April Presbytery meeting.
Maybe.
Or May. Well, it's gonna be May, but maybe
Is it
by
gonna be
May,
May?
maybe, yeah, it's usually May. By May, we might be able to get to the Presbytery vote.
Okay,
So it
that's- I wanted-
well, it depends.
I wanted to understand.
It depends on what.
Following it.
Right.
So it
exactly.
depends on what
Okay,
the
that's the
Presbytery
tr- that's
requires. If the Presbytery requires that its approval be given for listing a property for sale, you will do it as soon as you can.
Yeah.
If, though, the Presbytery says, this is what most presbyteries say, we need to approve the contract, then the Presbytery vote could be 9 months down the road when you've got a contract. It depends
I
on
see.
what your
I see.
this is where the absence of a national standard gets kind of fuzzy.
I think Sandy has implied that they don't have to approve listing.
I don't know.
Something says,
So we can just, then we can just, but they want, are you saying, so is it preferable that that we ask the leaders that the Presbytery approve the sale in concept? Maybe in May?
Well,
Or-
it depends.
Yeah, okay.
Like everything else, it depends.
All right.
What you don't want is to have to go get approval in concept and then have to go back and get the Presbytery to approve the contract.
So you want one vote?
So you
This is
want
what we're
one
gonna
vote
be-
from the Presbytery.
Just do what they
on
want.
February 7th is when they're gonna tell us what the,
Yeah,
And if they say,
Yeah.
well, we've really got to give you permission to list the property for sale, you say, okay, we can do that. Can we include in that motion that the Presbytery then authorizes the treasurer of the Presbytery and the stated clerk of the Presbytery to approve the final contract? We see that plenty of times.
yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
the Presbytery gathered should only vote once, if
Yeah.
possible.
Right.
The whole Presbytery is a body. My
Whoever
question,
shows up for that meeting.
right,
We got it figured out, so he's done
but
it.
my question is, do you need 100%?
No.
No, not on anything, it's always a majority.
50%.
Majority,
Well,
okay, good, that's all I need to know.
No. Some presbyteries have a supermajority requirement for real estate transactions.
Oh, well, we gotta check that
So
one.
you gotta ask that part.
we have standing rules, we can look those up.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay,
But typically, it's 50% plus one
50% of who attends?
of who attends, right?
Okay.
Well, there has to be a quorum, and different presbyteries
you have to
define
verify
quorums
their
different.
membership.
So presbytery meetings, the theory is it's 50% clergy, 50% laity. I don't think I've ever been to a meeting that actually worked that way.
no,
And some of these people would not be able to find this church with a road map and a dividing line. But it's 50% plus one of the people present, assuming a quorum has been declared. Same thing for your congregational meeting. If you don't have a quorum, we're all heading to the cafeteria because you can't do any business.
We've just about got a quorum right here, don't we?
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
No, we have a quorum.
Do y'all have the 10% rule?
Yes.
Of our membership, yeah, but we only
Yeah.
have 90-something members,
86 now.
86 members.
I
right.
spent
So it's,
all
we're
afternoon.
in.
We
Our session is
pared
a
our,
quorum.
we pared our membership roll down, which is good.
Yeah, a lot of churches have the 10%.
To from the inactives.
Yeah. Other questions? Folks, what do y'all want to talk about?
Have we wasted your time?
No, you've given us a lot to think about of how we can integrate your timing in with our timing and how we work it.
Could I ask you a real quick question? What does CBRE stand for?
Oh my God.
It's a trick
No.
question.
Coldwell Banker was the original company.
Oh, okay.
And then they bought Richard Ellis in 94
It's like 94.
maybe.
Oh, okay, so.
It's called one back.
You can Google them, they just fill up this page with all their
We're
information.
the world's largest commercial real estate company by 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you start here?
Caldwell Banker.
No, interestingly, they started in San Francisco in the great earthquake and subsequent fire.
Wow.
These two guys in Coldwell and Banker
She's got one.
actually saw
Oh,
it.
does she have one?
They're very
Oh, okay.
good people because they, a
Oh,
lot of people get
maybe
killed down
students.
their properties.
That's a
You
state.
know, and people were running around offering people money.
Oh, here's his, that's his.
And they thought, well, you need a broker in the middle of that, so these people.
To Bev. Oh, okay.
That's how it started.
CBRE represents the organization that buys and sells more religious real estate than anyone else in North America.
Thank you.
That's a pretty strong endorsement. It's not the Presbyterians, by the way.
CBRE, okay, like, okay, almost like the word.
Are you guys local?
Yeah, we're all out of the Oxnard office and the collections.
Oh, okay.
I'm not.
I see, you're
I'm
from
sure you couldn't tell.
Oh,
South Carolina.
You sound like you're from around here.
right.
Actually, my friends in South Carolina don't think I talk like a Southerner. My mother was a New Yorker, and
A little bit.
yeah, I talk like a Presbyterian, which is too much, right? All right, friends, if there are ways that we can be helpful, Maggie or me, don't hesitate to call, email, carrier pigeon, what have you. I'll be following up. I made notes of when you're meeting with your Presbyterian folks. I'll be following up with you after that. If you want to touch base before then, I'd welcome that call.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
so much.
That's the.
I hope
the
this was a
4
good
o'clock
use of
meeting?
your time.
Yeah,
I
they're all
apologize
4
for
o'clock.
running
Yes.
over.
Very good,
Very good.
very good.
Thank you very much.
All right. I wonder if, Paul, would you pray us out?
Certainly.
Thanks.
Heavenly Father, we are so happy to be here together in this, your house, where so many of our beloved family members have attended and worshiped you. We're so thankful also for the help to continue that mission through the sale of this beloved property. And I'm so thankful for the help of all present here and their guidance to this session and to this congregation. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Did you fellows have cards also for us?
Yeah, we
I just like one
Yeah.
of my, yeah.
So,
Are you two brothers,
Larry.
you two guys look good?